Yolande Barnes is chair of the Bartlett Real Estate Institute based at University College London. The aim of the institute is rethinking the traditional view of real estate. Before her move into academia in 2018, Yolande was director of world research at Savills. Now, next week, NLA opens its exhibition on the changing face of London, which looks at development that has taken place in the capital since NLA opened its doors some 15 years ago. So Yolande, I mean, how would you rate London's performance in accommodating growth over that period?
Well, I suppose London has exemplified the growth of the global city over the last 15 years. And I think alongside New York, probably been the preeminent city of culture, of business, of finance, and the list goes on and on. And I suppose our mindset has in the way we relate to London, the way we think about London, has been very much framed in that period of incredible growth.
And so what do you see are the sort of main successes and failures of the things we've done?
It's almost like now like talking about a foreign country, isn't it, as we face each other on Zoom screens. But the sheer agglomeration of skills, the collection of people that London represented, I think was incredibly important. And it really was a case of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, as in all of London's different, to use a kind of hackneyed term, all its different villages, you could meet and interact with and feed off the ideas and energy of so many different people. So the artists inspired the technologists who, in turn could interact with the money people. It was a complex and fascinating and wonderful, energetic web of human energy.
Fun things, if we hadn't won the Olympics, it would have been a very different picture, wouldn't it?
Like so many of these things, the Olympics accelerated what arguably was already in train. I mean, Stratford City had been planned as a mixed use, sort of another new quarter of London, if you like. The Olympics obviously gave it a wonderful and unique flavour. It's the Olympic legacy now, the Olympic Park, and so on. But I think something would have happened and continued to happen on that site, with or without the Olympics. I think we'd be 20 years behind. The Olympics enabled it to happen more quickly and focused people's minds on that part of London. Of course, we're going to come on to COVID. It's very difficult not to make all these comments with that sort of huge sort of COVID shadow hanging over everything.
In terms of our exhibition, we're looking back, because this was clearly one of those spurts of growth which London has seen at various times over its history, and it'll be interesting looking forward whether in fact that growth does continue, because as you say, COVID is going to have quite a major impact on how we shape the city in the future. But you are based on the Olympic site, aren't you? And so and NLA, we opened our doors the day after it was announced that we were going to get the Olympics in London. Do you think the way we delivered the Olympics was a success? Certainly it seemed to be a lot better than many other countries that had had the Olympics before.
For sure. I mean, I think London stands out against so many other Olympics, in as much as it's not only that we're using the site, and if you go to Athens, there's it's just a derelict sort of concreted over piece of land. It's not just that the Olympic site is being used; it's that it's thriving. It's doing something new for London. So UCL, a tiny bit of UCL occupies what was the huge studio building. If you imagine Canary Wharf lying on its side and a bit more, that's the size of this huge building that usually gets demolished after an Olympic Games. Here East has reimagined, repurposed this enormous building, and alongside with the press centre, it's forming part of a new innovation hub. So that spirit of the Olympics, the pioneering, so endeavouring spirit of the Olympics, I think has lived on there, and continues to evolve and change. I think it's no accident that the Bartlett Real Estate Institute, we're there rethinking real estate at the pioneering edge of London, as well as a sort of intellectual exercise in innovation.
So you're a key part of both tech and knowledge economy, which are probably might say the future economy of London, growing much faster than the more traditional financial services sector.
Yes, it was a few years ago that tech took over from finance as London's main industry. I think perhaps, because we've traditionally been so focused, and especially the real estate industry has been so focused on finance, it kind of went unnoticed. We as property researchers, when I was at Savills, we were pointing it out. But you could say, well, everything's digital now. Where does tech end and something more traditional start? It's the story of the early 21st century was always going to be digital disruption. I think it changed the face of London's finance, and actually the real estate of London's finance quite early on. I've often argued that the little hedge funds and the finance that started colonizing Mayfair in the early noughties is actually digital finance. It was, if you like, the way that algorithms freed people from that stronghold of the City of London that enabled not only the move to Canary Wharf of the sort of big corporates, but the emergence of the smaller corporates, taking very traditional sort of townhouse type space in Mayfair. So the city, and the wonderful thing about London is that it offered the right space for either solution, the big corporate in the big tower, or the small specialist hedge fund in a Mayfair office. And that will continue to be the case, I think. London's strength as a major sort of metro, world metro, is that it has a series of these very, not just workable neighborhoods, but livable, stayable, visitable, playable, makeable sort of neighborhoods. Yeah, I'm getting onto the future again, but if we're looking at a retrospective, I have a horrible feeling that that's what this 15-year sort of view is. It's the end of an era, but it is one that's worth analysing and looking at in order to understand how things may change in future.
So yeah, you were the first person that I heard, and many other people have repeated it since, first person to say that COVID-19 was actually just mainly accelerating a lot of changes that were already taking place. And your slogan at the Institute is, we're here to build a better future. And there's been lots of thinking that there are positive things coming out of COVID-19, less pollution, we're nicer to each other. But how do we make sure that the changes that are being accelerated are the positive ones? Because they're not all positive.
Quite. I mean, change brings with it good and bad disruption. And certainly the Bartlett School it talks about building a better future. The role of the Real Estate Institute is rethinking real estate. You have to have thought about that future quite deeply in order to build it. And I suppose as a researcher in the industry, that was my role, to actually apply some science, some thinking to development projects or investment projects or whatever. So you're always shaping the future through thought. So that's the good news, really, that we've been rethinking real estate for a while now. And the interesting thing, I think, about all the disruption that's come is that I don't think I've come across anything that I didn't expect and haven't already written about. And it really does reinforce this idea that COVID is an accelerant. It's a game changer in some ways, but it doesn't change the direction of travel. I think it kind of catapults us forward about 20 years into the future, potentially. So long as the forces, there aren't conservative with the small c forces sort of trying to pull us back to an old normal afterwards, that would probably be the negative thing. But I started talking back in 2015, 2016, I think, about what I call the fifth age of cities. And it was saying, we're going through a fourth industrial revolution, the digital revolution, which many people far cleverer than I have spoken about. But what I sensed was that within global cities, right across the world, and actually smaller cities as well, the digital technology and the rise of the tech industry was actually changing the way we use space. And what I saw was at a premium was street-based, highly flexible, mixed neighborhoods. The real selling point, the value of the city, was in its ability to attract human capital. Because although we're talking about a digital revolution, what it's done, I think, is actually put human beings at the forefront of what's important, economically, socially, and environmentally. And so this sort of rise of the tech city or the tech neighborhood was something that we were monitoring from maybe over the last decade or so. And I think that then sparked the idea, well, in a digital age, after this fourth industrial revolution, you can access anything anywhere and everything everywhere through a handheld device. Why then would we be tied to the old structures of the office, of the corporation, and so forth? And what is it when we can do so much digitally that actually really matters about our urban environments? And I think the answer comes to be, well, it's interaction with other human beings. And I think, I certainly feel, wonderful though Zoom is, that yearning for that, the ability to just drink a really good barista-made flat white and people watch out of a plate glass window. Just that the sparking of ideas, eavesdropping on other people's conversations, gosh, that's something I really miss. Now that's what the city allows. And I think, the polycentric dispersed city was coming anyway. It makes particular sense when people absolutely, I'm tempted to say refuse, but don't want to go back to schlepping en masse into the center of a city and out again. That mass movement of people is not going to happen. But that's not to say people won't be active and productive, and potentially active and productive in their own neighborhoods. I think what we're going to see is the rise of the neighborhood as the economic unit, if you like, the basis of productivity and economic generation. It's kind of exciting because that's something I've been thinking about for so long now and already observing. But it's also an opportunity for people to live better lives, for the planet to benefit from lower fossil fuel emissions and all that sort of thing. And actually also for a new economy to thrive. Necessity is the mother of invention, and I'm sure we'll continue to see massive advances in the technology that enables us to talk together today. Maybe, who knows, in 10 years' time, we might be able to manipulate 3D models and you might be seeing me as a hologram, who knows?
So then what happens to the centre? because it would seem to me that London's role as a global city is very much predicated on that both agglomeration, but also the vitality that the mix of uses, whether it's theatres, art galleries, concert halls, and that mix of business and culture, which is such a rich part of what happens in the centre, and that could be emptied out if we're not careful, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think let's put it baldly. There is a huge risk that some parts of London's centre will be emptied out. But it is the nature of agglomeration. This happens. The way what I liken it to use a kind of COVID sort of metaphor, is that cities breathe in and breathe out. They inhale and exhale. They grow, and we've been used to, over the 15 years, just watching London grow. We think that's normal, that's status. It's not. You know, there's an inevitable exhalation, and I think it was going to be inevitable anyway. And we have started to see the start of the polycentric dispersed city. The thing about the fifth age of cities, I think, is that it starts to look remarkably more like the first age. And what we have to hold on to is that people through millennia and across continents have gathered together in cities. Cities are a human habitat, and they're there because human beings can only do certain things in cities, and certain things that are necessary to being human beings, getting together, interacting, trading, and so forth. So one of the things I'm thinking about at the moment is how maybe the way that people agglomerate, instead of being around the corporate entity, you know, big towers with a name at the top, it's actually going to be around mutual interests, trading, the agglomeration, if you like, of ideas. So in some ways, maybe we're looking at a situation that's more like the old medieval city guilds. You know, people got together to cities to form guilds around, you know, that human interaction around work that people need. I think there are all sorts of interesting ways this could go. So there will still be, and of course, you know, we'll want to go to the theatre. You know, theatre has been part of a city life. You know, places of all sorts of human activities will continue to be needed. Whether we'll, you know, I can see a situation where every neighbourhood has its theatre, and whether the future of theatre land, as it were, the agglomeration of theatres, for example, will still look the same. I don't know. It may do. I think London's always been special like that, and the whole future of tourism, of course, looks terribly dire at the moment. But I think when this is all over, when there's a vaccine or the virus recedes, or whatever it is that happens, I think tourism is one of the things that probably will look more like the old normal. People will still want to visit a city as wonderful as London. Even, I mean, we forget, I suppose, that when I first came to London to live in the early 80s, there was a hollowed out centre. New York and London were perceived as pretty dangerous. Other sort of central sort of tourist areas, there were many no-go zones, and I don't think we're going to return to that. But there was a lot less activity. In fact, you know, from a real estate point of view, house prices were growing much faster in the suburbs and the outer southeast than they were in London in the 70s and 80s. Since then, London's sucked people from all over the world, all over the country into it. I think we're in for this exhalation. I think what's going to happen is, if you like, the idea of London is going to disperse over a wider area. And who knows, I mean, already the little outposts of Shoreditch all over the country. Down here, where I live in Kent, there's artists are colonising Margate, Canterbury. They've already, you know, a little bit of London's already landed in Whitstable. There are regions all over the country, little towns or small cities and towns, where the economy, the London economy, if you like, has landed and dispersed. And I think it's already a polycentric and dispersed city, and it will become more so as that huge sort of economic, cultural, human agglomeration starts to sort of breathe out from the city again.
But breathing out, does that mean that it stops growing? Because actually shrinking cities are not great places to be, and that is what the Abercrombie plan delivered, wasn't it? It was a shrinking London, and as you say, it was not a wonderful place. And I was just rereading Richard Rogers' book, The New London, which he wrote with Mark Fisher in 1991, and the back cover talks about London being dirty, scruffy, unjust, and not a great place to be. And we don't really want to go back to that sort of period, do we?
Make no mistake, this was in train before COVID. So in 2017, London saw net out migration in all age groups for the first time in probably at least a couple of decades. The only thing that kept London growing was international in-migration. Now we've got, well, all sorts of reasons, COVID and Brexit, which make it difficult to foresee a situation where we're going to see a massive influx of those international incomers. And bear in mind, Paris was actually losing population in absolute terms pre-COVID. I think New York and London were a few years behind in any case. And this sort of, you mentioned Richard Rogers, the urban renaissance idea that we've lived with since the 80s, this idea of sort of reversing that disastrous planning, the emptying out, the hollowing out of these great cities. We've been so used to the opposite. We've failed to realize that at some point that had to come to an end in any case. So I think London was always going to be looking in the next decade or so at managing either slow growth or slight declines in population. You couldn't continue to expect that continual sort of sucking in of people. And there was some, and of course, you could say, well, this is a natural sort of consequence of the way cities grow and change. I mean, I've yet to go to a major city, and I was going to say in the sort of advanced economies, but actually anywhere, Mumbai and Lagos included, for example, where you don't see a problem of whereas a city's population is growing, a problem of housing affordability. And I think one thing we were failing to acknowledge, although housing affordability was being talked about a huge amount, the very important role, sort of function it plays in this exhalation of cities, the pressures of the housing market were getting so much for so many people that they were simply migrating to saner housing markets. And this is why we've seen the rise of cities like Bristol and Glasgow as an alternative, but also these small cities, the Guildfords and Canterburys and Oxford and Cambridge and even places, I know, Hebden Bridge, Glossop, Derby, places like that as an alternative place for people to go. And I think that's in some ways the future of London. Its people will disperse to new and I think quite exciting but small sort of digital cities, if you like. London's
polycentric nature actually does make it, I think, perhaps a better post-COVID city than somewhere like Paris, which has a very different structure.
Yeah.
But, Yolande, thank you very much for your insights.
Real pleasure. Thank you.